I'd like to call this meeting of the Peoria Planning and Zoning Commission to order. I welcome everybody attending tonight, everybody watching on Peoria Channel 11 or online. Glad to have you all with us. We're going to begin with a roll call tonight. Chairman Sean Hutchinson is absent. Secretary Jay Atluski is absent. Commissioner Clay Alsop.
Present.
Commissioner Joanna Condi is absent. Commissioner Linda Grice.
Present.
Commissioner Brian Patterson.
Present.
And I, Vice Chairman Jeff Nelson, am present. Thank you all. I'd like to start by reading an opening statement that we begin all meetings with. This commission is composed of Peoria citizens who have been appointed by the City Council to serve on the commission as a civic responsibility without compensation. Our duty is to study and review planning and zoning issues within the City of Peoria. The commission hears zoning cases, holds public hearings, or may conduct a study session on a topic. Decisions made by the commission are forwarded as written recommendations to the City Council, who takes final action. All hearings are conducted in accordance with the rules for procedures and Robert's Rules of Order. Each case will be called in the order in which it appears on the agenda, unless otherwise announced during the meeting. In the interest of maintaining a fair and efficient hearing, the commission adheres to the following steps. Chair will open the case. City staff will then provide a brief report and recommendation. The applicant is then invited to give a presentation. Then any member of the public may provide testimony. Public testimony is limited to 3 minutes. When we call your name, please come up to the podium and provide your name and address. After all the testimony has been taken, we will invite the applicant back up to provide any rebuttal or final statements, and then the commission will discuss the case and make its final decision. Anyone wishing to speak must complete a speaker's request form and hand it to the commission assistant on my left. Please be as brief as possible and do not repeat statements already made by others. Any member of the public may appeal to the City Council the decision of the commission regarding a conditional use permit. The appeal must then be submitted in writing to the Planning and Community Development Department within 15 calendar days of the date of the commission's decision. All commission recommendations on public hearing items, including general plan amendments, rezone, zoning code amendments, and special plans, move forward to a regular City Council meeting. The City Council will then act on the recommendation of the commission. The City Council may concur with the decision, modify it, overturn it, or remand it back to the commission for further consideration. We welcome citizens' comments, and as a fellow member, or fellow citizen, I should say, of Peoria, we thank you in advance for your participation. This is the final call to submit speaker request forms. If anybody wishes to speak, please fill out that form and provide it to Ms. Ernest at the end of the dais. Let the record reflect that Commissioner Joanna Condi is here. So next up is a consent agenda. The consent agenda is for items that are routine in nature and consist of 3 items tonight. Item 1C is discussion and possible action to approve and excuse the absence of alternate Commissioner John Albright from the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting held on May 3rd, 2018. Item 2C is discussion and possible action to approve the minutes of the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting held on May 3rd, 2013. And lastly, item 3C is case CU 18-04, Arizona Liquid Labs, a request to obtain a conditional use permit to operate a lab that manufactures and stores liquids to be distributed for sale in retail stores for use in e-cigarettes. Proposed location of the lab is 16671 North 84th Avenue, Suite 140, within the Antigua Corporate Center. Any commissioners have any questions or comments about the consent agenda before us tonight? All right, seeing none, do I have a motion?
Hey, Mr. Chairman, I move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Thank you, Commissioner Patterson. Do I have a second?
Second.
Commissioner Alsop seconded. Please vote. And it's unanimous. Thank you, Commissioners. We're now going to move on to our regular agenda. We have 3 items under new business tonight. Item 4R. This is case Z18-08, Harvest Church initial zoning. The city is proposing to apply initial zoning to the recently annexed Harvest Church located at 8340 West Northern Avenue from the Maricopa County Rural Residential, or RU43 zoning district, to the city's Suburban Ranch SR43 zoning district. Staff, please present your report.
Members of the Commission, good evening. My name is Randy Proch. I will be presenting item 4R Z18-08. This is the initial zoning for Harvest Church. This is a city initiated rezoning to assign initial zoning to a property that was recently annexed per state statute. This site is contained Harvest Church, is approximately 10.49 acres, and is highlighted in red on the screen above. The municipal boundaries currently of Peoria are highlighted in blue, and everything that is hashed out is unincorporated Maricopa County. There are two steps to this process. The first is annexation. The city adopted the annexation ordinance on December 5th, and that was effective 30 days later. The statutes require that the city assign initial zoning within 6 months of that effective date. We try to assign the most analogous zoning district that we have in the city that matches up with the county's zoning district. In this case, we cannot permit densities or uses that are more intense than what is already permitted in Maricopa County, and that's per state statute. This graphic on the left represents the zoning that is currently in the area. The property in question, Harvest Church, is zoned RU43. To the west is general agricultural. To the north and to the northwest is a single-family residential R16. There are two pockets of light industrial I1 on the east, immediately adjacent to the site and across 83rd Avenue. And to the south is additional single-family large lot residential that is zoned RU43 in unincorporated Maricopa County. The public outreach is very similar to a rezoning application, except a neighborhood meeting is not required for initial zoning. We did send out notice of application and notice of hearing postcards to all residents within a 600-foot radius and all HOAs within 1 mile. And to date, the city has not received any opposition or support in regards to the case for initial zoning. With that, our key findings are that the state law does require that we the annexing municipality establish initial zoning. Zoning law or zoning must be equivalent and not permit greater densities or uses than what was allowed in Maricopa County. And to that point, the Peoria's SR43 district is the closest district that matches Maricopa County RU43. Our recommendation for you this evening is to recommend approval of Z 1808 to the City Council. And with that, I will take any questions.
Thank you for that report. Do any commissioners have any questions of staff? All right, is the applicant present tonight? You're the applicant.
Correct, this is a city initiated
That's
initial.
true, it is, isn't it? All right. Well, you have spoken unless you have anything else to add.
I have nothing further to add, thank you.
All right. If there are any further questions from staff, from commissioners, we're all good? Okay. Mr. Ernst, any speaker request forms on this item? None? Okay. All right. Do I need to open a public hearing then if we have no speaker request forms?
Mr. Chair, you can open and close if you like.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and do that. All right, I'm going to open the public hearing, but we have no speaker request forms, so I'm going to close the public hearing. All right, unless there's any further questions, do I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I recommend approval of case Z1808 to City Council as presented.
Thank you, Commissioner Alsop. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Condi. Please vote. And it's unanimous. All right, our next item is item 5R, case number Z1733, Trellis at Roundtree Ranch. This is a request to rezone the existing 83rd Avenue and Olive mixed-use community planned area development zoning district to the proposed Trellis at Roundtree Ranch PAD zoning district. The site consists of 2 vacant parcels which total approximately 18.5 gross acres located on the northeast corner of 83rd Avenue and Olive Avenue. Staff, can you please present your report?
Thank you, Vice Chair, members of the Commission. My name is Cody Gleason. I'm a senior planner with the City of Peoria. As referenced, the case before you tonight is Z17-33, Trellis at Roundtree Ranch Planned Area Development. The applicant for this case is Withy Morris on behalf of Evergreen Development, who is looking to do the multifamily portion of this development. This proposal is actually two phases of the overall development. The first phase being the multifamily component, and the second phase being the commercial component of the development. The site is located at the northeast corner of 83rd Avenue and Olive, and as referenced, would be a rezone from the existing 83rd Avenue and Olive planned area development to the proposed trellis at Roundtree Ranch planned area development. So some context for this particular site. To the north of the site, you have the Pinecrest single-family residential subdivision. To the east, you have the Roundtree Ranch Park, along with the city component of that park and the Roundtree Ranch subdivision itself. To the south is the Circle K gas station at the corner, and subsequently the bungalows development adjacent to that gas station. Across the street to the west, you have a Diamond Shamrock gas station and a entitled multifamily parcel, which has not proceeded forward with development. The case name referenced for that is Colonial. So for the general plan at this particular site, we have a specific area plan in place known as the Old Town Specific Area Plan. Within that specific area plan, we identify more refined land uses than kind of the broad brush of the general plan itself. So in this particular case, the land use designation within the specific area plan is the Old Town Commercial Mixed Use land use. What that calls for is a mix of both commercial and residential uses, and identifies a maximum density for that residential component of 25 dwelling units per acre. The proposed site would be approximately 15 dwelling units per acre. It actually comes out to a little less. So here we have a conceptual site plan of the proposed development. As a reference, phase one would be the multifamily component, which would occupy a majority of the site. That multifamily component consists of 2 to 3 story apartment buildings, some of those buildings being carriage houses, which would allow for parking on the ground level, and then a residence above that. Throughout the community, as you can see, in between buildings, the development has provided courtyard space for passive open space throughout the community. And then there are some active amenities that we'll get to here in a few moments that are dispersed throughout the community, but also a large portion of them centralized. Phase two of this project would be the commercial component along Olive Avenue, taking up a short portion of the 83rd Avenue frontage, but primarily fronting on Olive. That portion of the development is more conceptual at this point in time and is planned for commercial pads in the future. So, as referenced, there's several amenities throughout the site, not all of which are identified on here. But one of the key components in gaining that mixed-use designation is an integration between the two portions of the development. So here we have a commercial component and a multifamily component. And in order to integrate those as much as possible, the PAD calls for a connection point to be shared between the two portions of the development, which you can see as item 9 there. That shared access point would allow for both vehicular and pedestrian connection through to the multifamily component to ensure integration between the two uses. Additionally, you have amenities such as a pool, jacuzzi, dog park, and outdoor barbecues. The outdoor barbecues are interspersed throughout the community, but in addition to that, they have centralized amenities kind of focused at the clubhouse area to allow equidistant travel for the residents throughout the community to be able to access those amenities. Additionally, the multifamily portion of the development would provide an access point to the adjacent city park that you can see towards the bottom of the screen there, item 8. So that would allow residents of this community to not only use the amenities within their community, but also have free access to the city park that's adjacent instead of having to go out and around other components of the development. Here we have what is often focused on with larger buildings adjacent to single-family residential is the view shed for the single-family residential and the larger component, in this case, the multifamily. As you can see, the current PAD on the bottom of the screen would provide for a 30-foot landscape buffer in between the property line with the single-family and the proposed multifamily building itself. The applicant in this case has revised those standards to accommodate a 50-foot setback for the building setback, and then within that 50 feet, a 7-foot landscape setback. So they're ensuring that the view shed of the multifamily component compared to the single family is further away and allows for a larger visual barrier between the two rather than having them in close proximity with trees kind of tightly lined in that corridor. Additionally, the way that it's proposed allows for the space that would otherwise be occupied by a large landscape buffer to be dispersed throughout the community for items like open space. And we'll get to the ratio for the open space in just a little bit, but it provides more accommodation for both the view between the two and the usability throughout the proposed community. So here you can see the difference for the existing planned area development view shed on the bottom and the proposed one at the top. The proposed view shed does take into account the conceptual layout that they have currently that essentially accommodates a larger area beyond the setback to account for things like parking. So here we have an illustration of the phasing of the development, and with that phasing comes certain criteria for access points to the development. As referenced, one of the key components for this was ensuring the integration between the two uses. So you can see that would be the easternmost drive off of Olive there, kind of towards the bottom of your screen on phase 2, would occur with phase 1 of the development. So though no commercial activity would be occurring on site at the time of phase 1 development, it would provide that connection to ensure that it's established with the first phase and it's a prominent feature of the community. That access point would be a full movement access point as well as the access point on 83rd Avenue into phase 1. The other access points for the community would be the right-in, right-out off of Olive on the westernmost drive that you see there, and then the right-in, right-out off of 83rd Avenue for the commercial component as well. Both of those right-in, right-outs would be with phase 2 of the development. Additionally, as referenced, that phase 1 connection would allow for pedestrians, but also there would be a pedestrian connection that I had mentioned to the adjacent Roundtree Ranch Park that would occur with phase 1 as well to kind of amenitize the access to this particular development. Here we have a display of some of the differences with regards to the development standards between what is currently proposed within the what is current within the existing planned area development and what is proposed by this particular development, Trellis at Roundtree Ranch. So currently, the entitlement would allow for a 30-foot setback, building setback, and a 30-foot landscape setback, as I had referenced in those line of sight diagrams. What the applicant's proposing is a rather large increase to the building setback and a comparative reduction in the landscape setback. So again, pushing those buildings further away from the adjacent single family while still accommodating space for trees that would screen the subject site. The open space for this particular development would increase from the existing 7% requirement to approximately 12%. One of the other modifications that the applicant has made is with respect to parking. As you can see, there's two parking numbers up here, one being the overall parking for the development and the other the guest parking. As you can see, the parking reduction is solely with regard to guest parking. The City of Peoria's current guest parking requirements for multifamily essentially provide two ratios for guest parking, and it requires both of them in tandem. So it's almost double counting parking for the multifamily. So for the 275 unit development, they would be accommodating 517 parking spaces. 28 of those would accommodate guest parking. The parking stall dimensions were also a modification proposed. That modification takes the parking stall, the standard parking stall, from 9.5 feet by 20 feet to 8.5 feet by 18 feet. That modification's in line with some other cities around the valley, particularly Phoenix. Their standard parking stall is 8.5 feet by 18 feet. So the proposed development would allow for that horizontal integration between the two uses, housing the multifamily component and then the pad commercial component along Olive Avenue. Within that integration would include enhanced design standards that would be molded for both the multifamily portion of the development and the commercial portion, requiring that they essentially reflect each other and build on each other's design so it visually looks like a unified development rather than two separate developments. As referenced, the shared pedestrian and vehicular access, and then the multifamily component providing those additional amenities for the future residents. The Old Town specific area plan that I had referenced, in particular the commercial mixed use land use designation within that, does allow for office, retail, commercial items, as well as residential, and it calls for them to be mixed use, whether that is vertical integration or horizontal as proposed by the applicant. It does allow for densities, as I had mentioned, up to 25 dwelling units per acre, but the applicant is only proposing approximately 15 dwelling units per acre. This particular site, as called for in the specific area plan, is located immediately adjacent to major public transit route, the 83rd Avenue bus route that just went into service a short time ago. And then it is located at the arterial intersection of 83rd Avenue and Olive. This particular development is proposing a maximum building height of 40 feet. The land use designation calls for a maximum building height of 48 feet, so they're bringing it under that, that call for in the land use designation. Noticing was conducted in accordance with zoning ordinance standards, and the site was posted as required. A neighborhood meeting was held for this proposal on February 13th at the Peoria Community Center. There were 7 members of the public in attendance in addition to the developer and the council assistant for this particular district. So prior to that meeting, the city received an inquiry from a citizen identifying questions that they had in relation to the proximity of the proposed development and how the site would lay out and ultimately develop along their boundary. Information was provided to that individual and no further inquiry or follow-up was received from them. In addition, after the neighborhood meeting was conducted, one of the attendees of the neighborhood meeting provided a letter of opposition identifying concerns that related to noise and light pollution, view to and from the apartments, and the traffic that would be created by the proposed development. In regards to the noise and light pollution levels, noise levels would be as expected with any residential component adjacent to another residential component. This site in particular that is in opposition is zoned O1, so it's a legal non-conforming residence. It was operating as a residence, was rezoned to O1, and never ceased the operation of the single-family residence. So though it currently houses a single-family residential use, it is zoned as office, commercial, or O1. In relation to light pollution and light trespass adjacent to the existing development, the site plan review of this application would ensure that all lighting adjacent to any of the single-family residential is fully shielded and prohibits any light trespass into the adjacent homes or properties. We have a standard preventing anything in excess of 1 foot candle of light at the property line. So we would ensure that that light does not continue on. For the view to and from the apartments, as referenced, the setback for the proposed development has been increased in comparison to the existing entitlement from 30 feet to 50 feet, much of which will actually be larger just to accommodate things like drive aisles, parking, and building frontage landscaping adjacent to the apartment buildings. The applicant has also proposed providing increased tree sizes adjacent to the particular parcel that's in opposition. So rather than the typical 15-gallon tree, it would be a 36-inch box tree, which is a much larger tree to start with to ensure that the opposition parcel doesn't have to deal with waiting for the trees to grow in order to provide any view blocking. Additionally, the standards within the proposed planned area development would limit the facades facing adjacent single family to celestial windows in order to prevent any visible access from the interior of the apartment units to the adjacent single family. So what those are is typically windows that are above normal human scale so that you can't easily view out of them. They're more for allowing light in and essentially viewing the sky rather than being able to see out to neighboring properties. So that's one of the modifications that the applicant has made in order to try and address concerns. With regard to the traffic concerns identified within the opposition letter, the proposed development would be of a similar intensity to the existing entitlement and as proposed meets all City of Peoria traffic management requirements. So the city has identified those as no greater impact than what is currently entitled on the site. As a result, staff finds that the proposed development is in compliance with the general plan, more specifically the Old Town Commercial Mixed Use Land Use Designation, which provides for mixed-use developments at this location. Additionally, the rezoning request would better reflect the development needs of the area and account for existing built conditions in comparison to the current entitlement. As a result, staff recommends that the Planning and Zoning Commission recommend approval to the City Council of case Z17-13, subject to the conditions outlined in the staff report. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Cody. Any commissioners have any questions of staff? I have a couple. Can we go back to the slide? I think it was titled, it was where we had the setbacks, where you had the proposed and current setbacks, the 7-foot landscape area. I'm a little confused. It sounded like we were giving more distance between the apartments and the homes, but I'm not sure I'm understanding that correct. So according to this, under current guidelines, these buildings would be 60 feet away, adding the building setback and the landscape setback, and it's closer now, or am I misunderstanding this?
So, Vice Chair Nelson, those setbacks can be housed within the same area. So though the building setback is 30 feet and the landscape setback is 30 feet, they're not in addition to each other. They can occupy that same space. So the building would be able to be located 30 feet away from the property line in the existing entitlement. However, the applicant's proposing to move that minimum standard 50 feet and then have the 7 feet directly adjacent to the wall to better screen the proposed development.
Okay, so this is a significant increase in distance and setback, you're saying?
Vice Chair Nelson, that's correct. It's a significant increase by 20 feet versus the existing 30 feet.
Thank you for clarifying that. Can you go to the slide, I think the top of it was titled Request? I think, actually, yeah, either of these will do. On this slide here, there are some numbers on top of each of these little units, 2, 1. Is that the building height, or is that the number of bedrooms in the units? I'm not understanding what those numbers are for.
So those numbers, I believe all of the numbers merely represent keyed items. I would have to go back and look at the specific site plan, but the larger buildings that you see there are 3-story buildings at their highest point. They have lower components of them, but the largest portion of those buildings are 3-story. The smaller buildings that you see abutting the commercial portion and then towards what is the north end there, those are 2-story carriage units, providing that parking at the floor level and then the residential unit above.
So are each of these units a mixture of 1, 2, and 3-story? Or is there a certain unit that's all 3-story, one that's all 2-story, one that's all single-story? I'm not sure I'm following.
Vice Chair Nelson, all of the larger buildings would be 3-story. There's probably portions of them that would tier down, but we would have to evaluate that at the site plan level for the elevations themselves. Those smaller buildings are the 2-story buildings.
Okay. And then last question on the slide, the opposition slide. You made reference to these mitigating factors that the city would require to limit the impact of this on the opposing or the opposition parcel. Interesting terminology. So does that mean the only beneficiary of these mitigating factors will be a single homeowner or whoever wrote a letter of complaint? Or will everybody along that border be the beneficiary of those?
So, Vice Chair Nelson, members of the commission, the box size of the tree would be a minimum standard around that opposition parcel. One of the factors contributing to focusing on that is the fact that that parcel, if I can scroll back here on site plan. It's termed the out parcel there. So that
I
parcel.
don't see what you're talking about, I'm sorry.
Because it has a unique geometry at the very north end there.
Oh, okay, I got you.
Because it has a very unique geometry with respect to the rest of the development, the applicant wanted to make sure and try and address any concerns of that. The trees along the exterior of the remainder of the development would have to be of a sufficient size to exceed the parking canopies that would be provided, so they would likely be larger than standard trees, but there's no minimum standard for those, other than the city standard of the 15-gallon tree.
So the parcel you're referring to, is that that's the one in the top right where it says out parcel?
That's correct.
That's the only one we're going to do these mitigating factors for? The bigger trees?
The larger trees are the only difference
That's the
between
only
that
difference?
boundary condition and the other boundary conditions. So all of the setbacks would be the same between the adjacent parcels for the rest of the development. They would all have that 50-foot building setback. They would also have the 7-foot landscape setback. The only difference being for adjacent to the out parcel is the 36-inch box.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Commissioner Alsop, you had a question?
Thank you. What was, I believe earlier you said this was previously zoned PAD. What was the anticipated use in the previous PAD?
Vice Chair Nelson, Commissioners, that particular PAD allowed for mixed use. In that particular one, it was vertical integration rather than horizontal, so it had ground floor retail office components versus kind of having them horizontally integrated. So very similar concept, just organized differently.
And was that are the adjacent residential units a part of that PAD as well, or are those two separate zoning cases?
Vice Chair, Commissioner Alsop, the entire subject site is the subject of that existing entitlement that I had referenced. So nothing outside of what would be rezoned is contained within that existing entitlement.
Thank you.
All right, any further questions of staff? I'm going to open the public hearing. Is the applicant present tonight? Yes. Would you like to speak? Yes, I would, please. Please state your name and address for the record, please.
Mr. Chair and members, for the record, Bill Allison with Morris, 2525 East Arizona Biltmore Circle, here on behalf of Evergreen Devco, the developer of the multifamily portion of this project. Mr. Gleason did a very thorough job explaining this case, so I will just highlight a few things. I've got a full presentation, but I will not go through it because a lot of it is repetitive. I'm going to flip through it quickly if I could.
Okay, Mr. Chair, we need to pause for like 2 minutes just to switch over the PowerPoint.
Would this help? Are we back on the
Ready to
record?
proceed?
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead.
Like I say, I will go through this very quickly because Mr. Gleason did a very thorough job. You know what the property is. There we go. But a couple of things I'd like to highlight for you that were not mentioned in the presentation. You might be interested, this is something that was raised at our neighborhood meeting, and this is just information you might want to know. What the mix of units is going to be, that was a question the vice chair asked. It's going to be a combination of 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units across the property. These units are going to range between 726 and 1,244 square feet in size. And what was interesting to the neighbors also was the rent. The rents are going to be anywhere between $1,150 and $1,550 per month. There was also some concern about screening of the residents. The neighbors to the east, particularly in Roundtree Ranch, wanted to make sure that these were going to be quality individuals who are going to be residing at this facility. Evergreen is committed to having a very quality project, which is an asset to the community. And as part of that, not only do they have on-site management, but they also do a very thorough screening of all of their tenant applicants. They do a background check and a credit check, so it's much more rigorous than what your next-door neighbor might go through if they're just renting a house. Another interesting point is that although the lot coverage allowed would normally be 50%, we are proposing that there be no more than 24% lot coverage for this property. There's going to be a lot of open space. We've gone through the phasing. You've seen this slide that shows what the development's going to look like. This is a landscape plan that shows, in essence, where the landscaping is going to be. Again, a row of trees along all of the perimeters and a lot of internal landscaping as well. As Mr. Gleason indicated, we have requested a reduction in the setback on the perimeters. The current project was approved for 30 feet of landscaping and building setback, the same 30 feet. What we have proposed to do is to push the buildings further away from the property lines to improve sight lines and not have buildings looming over backyards. The current approval is for 40-foot tall buildings. That's what we're proposing as well for the vast majority of this project. However, we're going to pull them further away from the property line to mitigate impacts on the neighboring properties and the park. This looks at what the amenity package is going to look like. That's just, this is more important. Looking at the setbacks, this is a view that is looking to the east. So you're standing along the north edge of the project, the south edge of Roundtree Ranch, looking to the east. The current approval is to have as we said, a building setback of 30 feet. What we're proposing is that the minimum building setback be 50 feet, but in reality, what is proposed on the site plan is a building setback of 84 feet 4 inches. What is within that 84 feet 4 inches is landscaping, covered parking, the drive aisle, parking next to the building, landscaping side next to the building, and then the building. So again, even though the minimum that is the standard in the PAD is 50 feet, the actual site plan, which we are hoping to have processed if this application is approved, has an effective building setback of over 84 feet compared to the current 30 feet for the same height of building. This is a view that is looking to the north, so now we are on the west property line of Roundtree Ranch, looking north, again, from the edge of our 3-story buildings. And again, building setback is a minimum of 50, but in reality is going to be 84 feet, where the condition with the approved PAD today is a 30-foot from property line to the building. And as you can see on this slide, and you saw also on Mr. Gleason's slide, that it does make a significant difference on what the impact is going to be to the properties to the west, or to the east, I'm sorry, in Roundtree Ranch. It's important to note that also this is going to be the condition adjacent to the out parcel. The minimum building setback from the south property line of that out parcel is 50 feet, but in reality, what we're proposing is that setback be closer to 84 feet or just over 84 feet. That's to the apartment buildings that are south of the out parcel. The carriage units, which are to the east of the out parcel, there are 2 rows of those. That setback, again, minimum 50 feet, but in reality, it's going to be closer to 58 or 60 feet from that out parcel. We're trying to make sure that we are having as little impact on the neighbors as possible, and certainly less impact than the current approval. We've gone through the fact that there is a very extensive amenity package on this property. as part of the proposal. We think that there are, a number of benefits from this property. This is an infill project. This is a very important site, which is at the gateway to downtown. We are in compliance with both the specific area plan and the general plan. We believe this is going to be a positive impact for the entrance into your downtown area. We are slightly more dense than the current approval, but not by much. It's a very comparable product and project. The current project has some vertical integration of commercial and residential. We're going to be horizontally integrated. There was also certainly a horizontal integration component of the earlier project because the townhomes on the north end of the site would be horizontally integrated with the commercial at the corner of the two arterials. We're working to have a superior design that's going to be an asset to the area and to the community. We believe that this is an appropriate project for the area. Looking at the tree sizes, the staff report that you were presented in writing indicates that the landscaping on site is going to be bumped up by about 66% more than normal across the property. This includes in all of the landscape areas. So there are going to be more trees, and there's going to be larger trees everywhere on the site. We're doing a combination of 15-gallon and 24-inch box, and that is included in the landscape standards, which are in the PAD. So although the largest trees on site will be adjacent to the out parcel, and that again is partly because of the geometry of that and the fact that it juts into the project, there will in fact be larger trees throughout the entire property. We're not trying to benefit one neighbor at the expense of others. In fact, we're trying to do a good job of mitigating the impacts on all of the neighbors. One of the reasons we need bigger sized trees adjacent to the Roundtree Ranch and the Pinecrest property lines is that we need to have trees that are going to get over the parking canopies that are going to be 7 feet off of that property line, and that requires a larger tree. So that'll be one of the reasons we'll be doing that. Those are just some highlights that I think underscore what Mr. Gleason already said. We are here in agreement with the staff report and the stipulations of approval, and we look forward to getting started on this project, assuming that you are in agreement with that recommendation. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
Any commissioners have any questions or comments of the applicant? I do have a couple.
Sure.
And maybe you don't know the answer to this, but what would the price point rental-wise be for these units? Have you established what that would be?
Yes, the rental is going to be between $1,150 for the one bedrooms to $1,550 for the three bedrooms.
$1,150 to $1,550?
$1,150 to $1,550.
And can you speak to, obviously, I know there was a required public hearing. What more have you done to reach out to the community, those folks who have concerns about this being in their backyard? Have you walked the neighborhood? Have you met with neighbors beyond what the required public hearing? Anything?
We did not walk the neighborhood. We had the required public meeting. We had contact, or attempted at least to have contact with the neighbor who had sent the email to Mr. Gleason in January. Okay. We did some follow-up contact after the neighborhood meeting. There had been concerns, particularly from one of the neighbors, regarding construction times, construction noise. We followed up on that with them. And we frankly hadn't heard from anybody, and so we didn't do any further outreach.
Okay. Thank you. All right, thank you. Mr. Ernst, have you received any additional speaker request forms other than what I have? Okay. I'll go ahead and open the public hearing. I have 2 speaker request forms on this. I apologize if I butcher your name, John Bontismar? You could please come up and state your name and address for the record, and please keep your comments to 3
John
minutes.
Bontesmar. I live at 9383 North 83rd Avenue at that out parcel that's going to be surrounded by trees. Been at that property since before any of those houses, and now I have 5 street lights in the front yard, and this is going to come all the way around my home. I don't think anybody here would want to live in the parking lot of this project, and that's pretty essentially where I end up. There's 23 parking spaces around my backyard. That's not going to be enjoyable for anybody. 7-foot canopies, 6-foot fence. Any way you go about it. You plant all the trees you want, which take water, that's not the answer. There's 12 residences we're going to be at that. The first set of plans that went through a couple years ago had me being bought out and 12 residences per acre or whatever it is. They were gonna put 12 on my property and work something out. Then that went away. This came back, building around me. I just don't, the traffic in front is suicidal now because no one's expecting me to pull into my old farmhouse. So it's almost a rear-end collision daily. Now 243 more condos pulling out to the north, not expecting me to turn into my driveway. That's gonna be not enjoyable. There's no part of it, the aesthetics, to come home every day, they're worried about what it's gonna do for and look great for, it's not gonna look great. A 1957 house, the Bailey original house of Peoria, the family that founded the town built the home, stuck in the parking lot of this high rise. No matter how you do it, the back porches of those are down on my yard. At 40 foot high, you could move it down the road. You're still looking at each other all day long from my home to those buildings. So the trees sound great, the distance sounds great, but if we pull out a tape measure and I show you guys what 80 feet is and 40 foot high and what I have to deal with now, you look any apartments, the back of apartments anywhere is not the best place. I don't care if it's in Scottsdale. That puts me in the parking lot of this project. I don't like how it's going. I'm just that guy. There's nothing I can say or do that changes it, but it's not pleasant for me watching all of this. They put a bus bench across the street today. That's people sitting at a bench, staring at my tools, my work trucks, my stuff. It's just the whole growth of it. I understand it's gonna grow. I'm stuck where I'm at, but trees aren't the answer for me because I'm stuck in that parking lot. So the traffic to the front, the aesthetics, who wants to buy my home in the future in the parking lot of condos? It's just the whole thing. Someone should have came to me with a fair market value and tried to do something so they could put 12 more residences at that location. No one's followed up with us since the last meeting. We wrote letters addressing the traffic, the aesthetics, the sound of 21 sets of car doors every day at my back door. From the east, north, south, any way you look at it, I'm stuck in the parking lot of this, and it's just not, I don't know what to say. I went to the last meeting, they proposed it. I don't know what happened to the original plans, which is what he had questioned. There was a set that had them talking with us. If someone I got an LLC corporation I've ran since 98 out of that home. So yes, I do. It is business, but it's my home. I raised my kids there. I've been that taxpayer of Peoria from there, but I understand they could put 12 more or whatever in another building and eliminate all of the tree thing and the parking thing and all of these things just seem great. Hire lawyers, redesign it, do whatever, but trees don't stop the aesthetics of this 1957 house in the parking lot of a condo project. I don't know what to say. I got 3 minutes or whatever to explain my deal, but it's just not cool. I understand growth, but
Gotcha.
there's no part of it that's good.
Thank you. Appreciate your comments. We have another speaker. And again, I apologize if I butcher your name. Lorinda Braun or Brown? Brown. If you could state your name and address for the record, please.
Lorinda Brown, and I live at 9383 North 83rd Avenue as well. Without having to repeat everything that John just said, I would just like to say I've been in close contact with Cody Gleason on anything going on. We have not been contacted, so I just want to restate that we have not been contacted in any way by anybody. So I am opposed to this unless something else further can be offered or whatnot. So that's pretty much all I have to say without repeating myself or him, okay? Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comments. Does the applicant have any rebuttal or additional comments to add?
Mr. Vice Chair and members, just very quickly, both of the opponents were at our neighborhood meeting and had notice of that meeting. We spoke to them that evening, and We have done what we can to mitigate impacts from the development onto that property. I just have to underscore that the current approval would allow buildings that are 30 feet off their property line. We're looking at buildings that are going to be between 58 and 84 feet off their property line with some enhanced landscaping. As Mr. Gleason indicated, any lighting on site is going to be shielded so that it doesn't spill off of the property. This is an appropriate development for this location, and we are certainly sympathetic to their concerns and have done what we can to address them.
Do any commissioners have any questions of the applicant?
Now,
Commissioner Pedersen?
when you initiated this project, was there any thought given to trying to acquire that property to make it part of your development?
Mr. Vice Chair, Mr. Patterson, there was some discussion, but the price that was discussed was not something that would work for this type of development. So it was not able to be acquired and brought into the project. It was not economically viable.
Any other questions? Sir? Any other questions?
Just out of curiosity,
Commissioner Conde?
Joanna Conte, was an appraisal done on that property to see what the fair market value was, both before and after, as it is now, and possibly with the proposed development? Was anything done to determine what the fair market value was?
Mr.
No.
Vice Chair, Ms., I'm going to butcher this, Conde?
Conde?
No, there was not that type of work done. Frankly, the price that was offered to us was such that it wasn't going to be able to work for this project. There did not seem to be any room to negotiate at that point, and that happens occasionally without parcels. It's unfortunate, but that's what happens, and we're doing what we can to mitigate impacts on that property.
Okay.
No further questions. I'm going to close the public hearing. Do we have any further questions or comments from commissioners before we take action on Z1733? Seeing none, do I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Chair?
Commissioner Alsop.
I motion that we recommend approval case Z1733 to City Council, subject to conditions in the staff report.
Okay, we have a motion on the table. Do I have a second?
Yes, I second it.
We have a motion and a second. Please vote. And the recommendation for approval is unanimous. Thank you, Commissioners. Our next item is item 6R. This is case number Z18-01, Paradise at P83. Request to rezone approximately 16.1 acres from planned light industrial and general agricultural zoning districts to the Paradise at P83 Planned Area Development Zoning District. The site is located east of the 75th Avenue and Paradise Lane intersection. Staff, please present your report.
Good evening, Vice Chair, members of the Commission. Lori Deaver presenting Z1801 for this evening. Quick overview for you this evening. The applicant is Withy Morris on behalf of Opus Development. The proposal in front of you is for a 352-unit multifamily community. As noted, the location is east of the 75th Avenue and Paradise Lane intersection, and the project size is approximately 16.1 acres. This is a rezoning request, as noted by the Vice Chair, to go from planned light industrial and general agriculture, ag, to a PAD in this situation. For context purposes, this is an existing vacant site. To the north, you have the Skunk Creek Channel, and a little further up, you have the commercial shopping center, which is Arrowhead Palms. To the east is within the city of Glendale. That is the proposed Cadence at Park Paseo. That is a future subdivision. We have an existing subdivision, which would be Cabrillo Point, as you see. To the south of the site, you have the ACDC, the Arizona Channel as well. And to the west, if you will recall, recently we had the Marriott case before the board. So there is the proposed Marriott Ton Place, and also there is the Corner Paradise, which is anchored. The anchor is also, that is a commercial shopping center as well. I wanted to touch briefly on the applicant's proposal. This is intended to be an urban walkable community within the P83 district. So again, it is 352 units. It is a mixture of 3- and 4-story buildings. So the graphic that you see on the screen is the conceptual site plan, and I wanted to make a couple of notes in this particular case. If you can see within the center of the graphic that I'm circling, kind of a teal color, those are the 4-story buildings. In addition, you have in the dark blue areas, almost making a C around those, if you will, those would be 3 stories, so those would be the darker blue. The applicant has provided conceptual elevations of what the buildings would look like. The first one on the top, letter A, is 75th Avenue, and this is if you were looking from Paradise Lane into the project. The middle item, which is elevation B, that is if you were looking from the AC/DC, looking north into the site. The third one on the bottom would be looking from Skunk Creek, looking south into the project. Also, the applicant provided a kind of or close-up, if you will, of a 3-story building that would be along 75th Avenue. So letter A up at the top on the left would be along 75th Avenue. Item B over to your right would be along the Paradise Lane terminus connection. C would be the east side of the building, and D would be the south elevation. So this would be a representative, an illustrative graphic, if you will, as to what one of the 3-story buildings would look like. There is a range of amenities for the residents. They are located throughout the project. This is the first of a couple that I'll quickly go through. This one is a dog park. You can see it's got shade trees, fencing. It is within the corner, if you will, of the project. If you look to the right on your screen, I've noted the location in the red box. Moving to the 3 stories over to the left, we have additional range of amenities, including seat wall. There's an outdoor living space, turf area. This would be on the anchor of those 3-story buildings. Continuing, we go into the center of the site. This is a fitness center, the clubhouse, pool. It has shade structures, and so forth in that regard. So this is where those 4-story buildings are. This creates a centralized amenity. This would be kind of like the activity area of the community, if you will. Continuing on, we have one more set. This would be the open space in between the 3 stories along the southern portion. Again, we have trellis structures, we have shade structures, landscaping, and additional seating walls, et cetera, for the residents throughout. Now, these range of amenities will be connected through various pedestrian connections within the community itself. But one of the other items I wanted to point it out to you was the primary entrance is off of 75th. It has a promenade entry area, if you will. This is kind of a graphical representation that you're seeing if you were looking down on the project. So 75th Avenue would be to the left of the screen, and this would be kind of the entry drop-off area for the residents. It would also kind of create this grand boulevard theme and kind of the sense of place, the arrival into the community. And from there, you would go into either the north residence, the south residence, and so forth. What would that look like? They've provided a graphical representation of that. So this would be the entry area into that feature along the Paradise Lane terminus. Also to the right of the screen, that would be what it would look like in the evening, and to the bottom on the right is just another representation slightly of what those buildings would look like rendered, if you will. So this would be kind of the look and the feel and how they are trying to create that urban walkable amenity package. And so I'll continue to talk about that a little bit further on. This project proposes two critical linkages in our Skunk Creek Regional Trail system. The first one will be along 75th Avenue. In addition to the hardscape, they're actually doing enhanced pedestrian nodes, and I'll show you what those would look like shortly. They're also providing a connection along the Skunk Creek Wash. If you will remember back to the Marriott case over to the west-hand side, they are proposing the trail connection on 75th as well. So this creates the linkage. There will be a pedestrian connection across 75th down the road at some point in time. But what this does is create the linkage from the Marriott case and further over from the west within the P83 district, all the way and continues, Skunk Creek continues into the city of Glendale and beyond. So this does create the critical path, if you will, to make those connection points. So I did talk briefly about enhanced entry nodes. This is along 75th Avenue. They are looking to do raised concrete planters in there. There's seating walls. They have also integrated some hardscape shading as well. This is an artist's rendering of what those enhanced entry nodes would be. They are strategically located along the 75th Avenue streetscape. So as people continue to walk, they have various options to kind of go out and enjoy the scenery, if you will, and have a rest stop if they need to, if they're along the Skunk Creek Wash and the trail. Since this is within the P83 district, there is a nod to the signage elements that are existing within the district itself. There is a P83 gateway element, if you will, signage that's shown in the bottom right or bottom left-hand corner. So they are kind of acknowledging that this is the gateway, the anchor piece, if you will, on the eastern side of P83. They're also tying that in with their monumentation within the center of that promenade entry area. So they have a similar kind of monolithic kind of feature for their signage as well that will light up. So there's a tie of the basically the colored materials and elements out of the P83 signage. They're linking and creating kind of that connection. And so there's a blending of those materials into the project. So let's talk about staff's analysis on this particular one. From a general plan standpoint, this is considered the sports complex mixed use. That land use category was established in 2011. And it was created after the urban design plan. The Peoria Sports Complex Urban Design Plan was adopted by City Council, and that had very specific recommendations to turn this particular area into employment, commercial retail services, kind of the recreational tourism, and residential was appropriate in that regard. And overall, from start to finish, it was supposed to be a walkable, destination-oriented entertainment district that focused on mixed use. So similarly, the Peoria Sports Complex Urban Design Plan is if you will, a master plan. It was adopted, as I mentioned, in July of 2010 by City Council. It outlined desired land uses. It gave character areas, what each area of the district would look and feel like. This particular area, the mix that you see on the screen, they actually did an alternate, proposed illustrative layout, if you will, for this particular site. The desired land usage within that plan showed a hotel, a mixed-use commercial development. We had mixed-use residential and a parking garage. And where residential occurs within the P83 district or this particular area, they suggested that the minimum density for any residential use would be above 25 dwelling units per acre. This graphic is illustrative in nature. From a circulation standpoint, they did show that Paradise Lane would not continue. It would terminate, if you will. See where it says MXD or mixed use terminus at that point. There were 3 driveways envisioned on 75th, so this was kind of the thought process in terms of the look and feel for the site at the time in 2010. So the land use. The residential land use, as I talked about, is allowed within the P83 district, and the specific desire within both the general plan and the urban design plan is for an urban feeling, pedestrian-friendly environment. So the proposed density is approximately 22 dwelling units per acre, so it is near the recommended level in the urban design plan. In terms of character in design, the urban design plan required that any development adjacent to existing residential uses need to address compatibility. Now, that plan was not prescriptive or restrictive. It was basically you needed to propose the development and mitigate it as appropriate based on the actual land use that you were suggesting. So what the applicant is proposing is locating the tallest buildings within the center of the site and in a similar fashion to what was originally envisioned in the urban design plan. With that said, they are doing a combination of increased building setbacks, a shift in the orientation of the actual building layouts to address concerns with visibility onto the neighbors. They're also looking at doing mature landscaping to screen and/or reduce the impact of the buildings onto there. And I can talk about that briefly shortly. So let me touch on zoning, and then I'll get into a couple of get into that matter a little bit further. So in terms of zoning, as we talked about, the subject site is planned light industrial and agricultural. Similarly, this is a patchwork. This zoning in this area pre-existed even before the sports complex, which is why you see industrial and ag at this particular site. So that kind of, those particular districts follow to the north. To the east was within the city of Glendale. They have residential subdivisions. The Cadence at Paseo Park is R14, so 4,000 square foot lots. They also have Cabrillo Point, which is R16, or 6,000 minimum square foot lots. Again, a continuation of light industrial to the south of this site, and it kind of follows around, and now we have PAD and C2 along on the west. So it is kind of a hodgepodge of zoning, if you will, all across. From a zoning analysis standpoint, I wanted to touch on this a little bit in depth. So the existing industrial designation allows certain standards. I've provided an RM1, which would be a typical multifamily district that you would normally see to show in comparison. And then the third column I show is the proposed PAD standards, just for illustrative purposes. A couple of things I wanted to point out on this particular slide is the maximum building height. The existing zoning today allows a 48-foot maximum building height. Our typical multifamily zoning district would allow a 48-foot building height as well. The proposed building height maximum would be 48 feet, so it is consistent across the board. The lot coverage, the industrial type of use would be a maximum of 40%, but our typical multifamily in this proposed PAD, the maximum coverage is 50%. The actual lot coverage being suggested by the applicant is far less than that, approximately 26%, so it's half of what would typically be allowed. Building setbacks, those are in keeping with the multifamily as well. Side setbacks are consistent with the typical multifamily standard. I would like to point out on the rear setback, they've actually increased it. We would normally see 15 feet. They are proposing 30 feet in this instance. So it is an increase for a rear setback. From a traffic analysis standpoint, one particular item, Paradise Lane is not proposed to continue within the Peoria general plan on the circulation map. As we've talked before, the general plan is made up of a number of different elements, and we touch on land use, circulation, open space, and various other items. So in particular, city staff has presents and a council approves a circulation map, and any road that would be collector and above would need to be shown on this map. If it is not shown on the map, staff would not be able to require the road to go in. So as of today, the Peoria general plan does not require the Paradise Lane connection to go into Glendale on the Grandview Road. That is also consistent with what was approved through the urban design plan, also by council. If you will see, as I noted earlier, this is the alternative plan that was shown within that report. And basically, it shows the Paradise Lane terminating a centralized amenity area or a group of buildings around there, and all of the access points would be from 75th Avenue. So it was not contemplated to continue into the city of Glendale. Continuing on our analysis, the urban design plan is what you see on the left. The proposed site plan is what you see on the right. They are similar in nature, if you will, in terms of access. Primary access is from 75th Avenue and Paradise Lane. The current proposal is to have 2 emergency access points also on 75th Avenue. And as I've talked about before, the Paradise Lane terminus, it terminates within the center of the project. The proposed access has been reviewed by our city traffic staff. It is consistent with the Peoria general plan and the urban design plan, both which were adopted by city council. There is a potential for possible emergency access to Grandview pending Glendale approval, because that is under Glendale's jurisdiction. Public outreach. As is typical with a rezoning case, the notice of application and notice of hearing postcards were mailed out to residents, also HOAs within the required radius, and the site was posted in accordance with city requirements. Neighborhood meeting was held February 21st at the Paseo Verde Elementary School. 13 members of the public attended. Subsequent to that meeting, the applicant has submitted a citizen participation plan, We did receive both support and opposition to this case. At the meeting itself, staff received a signed petition from 30 of the Cabrillo Point residents at the meeting that has been included within your packet. We received a total of 3 letters of support, 2 from a very happy individual. He wanted to provide 2 from what he was a commercial property owner. He owns the corner parcel where Osso is at, so he wrote 2. We also included this in this evening. We received 1 additional letter of support from a commercial property owner that was passed out also. We've received 2 emails in opposition as well. In summary, they had all similar concerns, and so those topics of concern kind of fit within 3 categories or 3 areas, if you will. The first one is traffic generated by the project that impacts 75th Avenue. The second is traffic on Grandview Road, and the third was building heights. So let me touch on each of those briefly. Traffic impacting 75th Avenue. So the applicant submitted a traffic study for the proposal, and based on the information provided, that was reviewed by city staff, and it was determined that 75th Avenue had sufficient capacity to handle the additional trips for this particular project. There is additional lanes and infrastructure being added, both because of the Marriott application, and in addition to this particular project, they would be required to do additional infrastructure as well. There's also a number of additional capital improvement projects within the area incurring. So based on all of that, 75th Avenue was determined to have sufficient capacity for this project. As mentioned, the second item is traffic on Grandview Road. So as I've mentioned, the Peoria General Plan and the Urban Design Plan, both approved by council, do not require a vehicular connection to be made from Paradise to Grandview. In essence, the Urban Design Plan specifically called out that the Paradise Lane was to terminate within the center of the project. At the neighborhood meeting, the applicant took a poll of those who were in attendance, and there was no consensus amongst the neighbors with regard to wanting the connection from 75th Avenue from Paradise into Grandview. And they specifically cited concerns regarding cut-through traffic that would occur from Bell Road to Paradise Lane coming in to their neighborhood. So those were some of the items expressed at the meeting. In addition to a vehicular connection running through the middle of the project would severely impact the urban design and the walkability of the project. You're effectively splitting it into two, and so it does not create a project that is consistent with the vision of the area outlined within the general plan and the urban design plan. It is meant to be urban walkable regional connections, and so the connection on Grandview is not favorable in that regard. The last item of concern from the residents was building height. So the building height maximum, as I mentioned, is 48 feet. That is consistent with what is allowed under the existing zoning for the industrial use. It is also consistent with what you would typically have for a multifamily project. The urban design plan, as I mentioned, speaks to compatibility to residential areas. And again, it's not prescriptive or restrictive. You can achieve a compliance in a number of different ways. You just have to identify what you're doing to achieve compatibility. The applicant is proposing 48-inch box trees located immediately adjacent to those 4-story buildings. They are suggesting of planting 36-inch box trees immediately adjacent to the Cabrillo Point residence as well. There will be additional planting, low-level planting up against the various project locations to strategically screen. They did ask the neighbors at the meeting if there was a preference on the type of landscaping that was provided, including the type of tree. And so that discussion was had. In terms of compatibility, the applicant is proposing to move the buildings away from the residential. As we talked about, a typical rear setback condition would be 15 feet. They've recommended 30. In reality, they've pulled the buildings back because of the additional height. So the minimum would be 97 feet away, a little over 97 feet away from the nearest residence. And that's for a 3-story building. The 4-story building is about 102 feet pulled back from the residence. In addition to that, I talked about shifting of the interior layouts of the building, and the applicant can speak more to that. But what was communicated to the neighbors at the neighborhood meeting was the internal layout of the individual units would be moved in a way to discourage common areas, if you will, to look out and the potential for residents within this project to look onto the residents. So they've made a cognizant design effort to shift the building and the internal floor plates within the building so that you don't have that view into the residents as well. One of the questions that was posed at the neighborhood meeting was, could you move the 4-story buildings up against 75th Avenue? The applicant responded that once you start increasing the additional heights along 75th Avenue, you start creating a monolith kind of facade up against there, and you lose some of the shading and all of the urbanization efforts. In addition to the parking areas, people don't want to be walking, the residents of those particular buildings don't want to be walking so far, so you would have to put parking up against the street and kind of break that urban feel, if you will. And once you put that parking lot adjacent to 75th Avenue, the ripple effect is the buildings start getting closer to the residences within Glendale. So as I said before, the urban design plan speaks to compatibility. Based on the mitigation efforts, staff believes this particular design poses the least impact to the residents on the Glendale side adjacent to the project. So because of that, our key findings in this case is the zoning district is conformance with the goals and objectives of the Peoria General Plan and the City of Peoria Sports Complex Urban Design Plan. The PAD amendment is consistent with the land use, mentioned in both of those, which is sports complex mixed use. And the amendment actually is a better reflection of the development needs of the area. It is consistent with the vision, and it's accounting for the existing built environment. So staff is recommending approval of case Z1801 to City Council, subject to the conditions in the staff report. And with that, I will take any questions.
Thank you for that report, Lori. Any commissioners have any questions of staff? Commissioner Condi? I'm sorry. Were you wanting to speak?
Yes.
Okay.
You mentioned that, I believe that you said lot coverage was 26%, but the chart I'm looking at didn't show that. Can you clarify for me?
Vice Chair Nelson, Commissioner Grice, the maximum set is a maximum. It doesn't mean that the applicant goes up to the maximum. In this case, the typical RM1 standard, maximum lot coverage is 50%. So they basically took the city's typical maximum lot coverage number and just applied it to their site. But as I've talked about, the actual lot coverage number is closer to 26%.
Any other commissioners have any questions? I just had a few. Lori, can you go to the slide that had the elevations, the A, B, C, and D? Because of quite a ways back. I apologize. I have to send you so far back into your presentation.
That's okay.
Just had a question on elevation C. Specifically, I was looking for an elevation that what would those residents see that live in Glendale on the east side of the project? Is that, am I understanding right? It would be elevation C? I think it was the next slide, actually. The other C. Next slide over.
Vice Chairman Nelson, the applicant did not provide an elevation from the residence into the site. This was just trying to get a graphical representation in terms of the buildings adjacent to 75th Avenue. If you would like, I would ask maybe the applicant can better speak to that one. Was there a particular question that you had with regards to it?
I was kind of curious that we wouldn't have an elevation showing what the impact of this would be on residents that are living near it. I would say if I'm living next to it, I want to know what I'm going to be looking at. And that's why I thought they would provide that, but it doesn't sound like they did.
Vice Chairman, it is a good question. For a rezoning application, elevations are not required. The elevations that you see are actually a part of the site plan application that is running concurrently. In terms of what the zoning is looking for, we typically will look at land use, mitigation setbacks, the development standards. And so the PAD sometimes will provide illustrations. In this particular case, the illustrations are part of the site plan application and not a part of the zoning case. So this is illustrative in nature and subject to change.
Okay, thank you. A question on the traffic. I saw that was a traffic study done for 75th Avenue. Did they look at Paradise as well? I can see with the hotel going there, the high-density development that's going to flow right into Paradise. You could have some issues there. Is there no traffic engineering had no concerns about traffic?
Vice Chairman, I would actually like to introduce you down the road. We have our traffic engineer who would better speak to that.
Perfect.
Vice Chair Nelson and Commissioners, I'm Chris Lonka. I'm the Assistant City Traffic Engineer. To respond to your question, yeah, there's separate traffic studies done for this project. There was another one done for the hotels. In fact, they were done by the same consultant, and so they took the numbers from both projects, and it was evaluated to make sure that the signal at Paradise and 75th Avenue operates efficiently and serves both projects. There was a lot of coordination between both projects. to do the off-sites on Paradise Lane associated with the hotels, to provide a through lane on Paradise Lane that will feed into this project. So it'll be an eastbound through lane at the intersection to feed this project. Dual lefts, so it'll be eastbound to northbound dual lefts from Paradise onto 75th Avenue. And then this project has to match the lane width, so when you have the traffic signal, all the lanes line up and they're not on top of each other. All that coordination's been done. As far as the traffic impact for this particular project, I'm looking at the numbers. Believe it or not, apartments don't generate that much traffic in the grand scheme of things. I'll give you an example. In the study, they're saying there's 130 AM peak hour trips and approximately 160 PM peak hour trips. So let me put that in perspective. We don't usually require a traffic study until you hit 100 peak hour trips because the impacts are usually minor in nature and you're not going to get a lot from a traffic study.
Okay.
This barely met the threshold to require a traffic study. The next tier, which is a bigger traffic study, more of a regional stuff, is 500 peak hour trips. So this was 160 in the PM peak, 130 in the AM peak. Their one axis is going to tie into the existing traffic signal at Paradise and 75th Avenue. They're going to create the fourth leg of that intersection. Level of service, and that, what level of service is it's a calculation, it's a measurement of delay. We call it controlled delay in the traffic engineering realm, but basically how much do people have to wait at a traffic signal? And it's measured from A to F, just like a normal grade. A is great, F's not so good. And we actually looked at every single turning movement at the intersection. Everything was an A, except the left turns and the through movements from Paradise going eastbound and Paradise going westbound. So 75th Avenue operates at a level of service A with this project, operates at a level of service A without this project. And so the traffic impacts will be minor in this area.
So I want to make sure I understand. You said there will be, so how are we flowing traffic? Is it with the lighted arrows? Is it just lane improvements, widening of the street? Help me better understand that.
So the hotel projects will have half-street improvements that will widen Paradise Lane to accommodate additional lanes needed for the dual lefts. So this will be all going eastbound. Dual lefts at the intersection of 75th and Paradise Lane, eastbound and northbound. One through lane, and that through lane will actually service this apartment complex.
Right.
And then a separate right turn lane, so that'll be a eastbound to southbound right turn lane. That's going to be associated with the hotel project. Across the street, which is this project, they're going to have to widen their main entry to accommodate to accept that one through lane coming through, but also to match up the left turn lanes, because we need to turn the left turns at the same time so they don't overlap each other. And so all that geometric has been worked out with the applicant to make sure that the signal will operate efficiently. And what we want to make sure we don't do is what we call split phase a traffic signal. And what that means is you have to serve one leg and stop everybody else, and then you serve the other leg and stop everybody else. And the reason why we would do that if the left turns can't turn at the same time. But we made sure that the geometrics work. And then as they continue on to construction documents, this project and site plan, we will verify that that's going to be the case and that people traveling on 75th Avenue, which is the major corridor,
Right.
will experience minimal delay. People on Paradise Lane will have to wait a little bit, but then we'll adjust the traffic signal to accommodate major events like spring training or 4th of July events. We have that programmed in the controller, so it's intelligent enough to adjust the timing to accommodate demand when you have stuff at the sports complex, or just your typical average day where we're trying to progress 75th Avenue.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Okay, I see no other questions from commissioners. I'm going to open the public hearing. Is the applicant present tonight? Do you wish to speak? Please state your name and address for the record, please.
Certainly. Adam Baugh, Withie Morris, 2525 East Arizona, Biltmore Circle. Cody, is there a clicker? Oh, perfect. Thank you. I appreciate it. I appreciate your time tonight. You've been here for an hour and a half, so I'll try to be brief, and I think your staff has done a fantastic job preparing you for this hearing today. I presented from a lot of different cities, and I rarely see a staff report as thorough as the one that's been prepared by Lori and Peoria staff, so kudos to them for what they've done. This is a project long in the making. When we first approached the city and said, hey, we're thinking about doing something here, we knew about Peoria's sports complex, we knew about the spring training complex, we knew about the synergy that was in the area. What we didn't know about was the planning that had been orchestrated long in advance of us coming here, and the vision that was set forth. And when staff shared with us those planning documents and the types of ideas and visions they had here, we took those back and we said, well, how can we design a project that sort of fits in with that? And we were very encouraged by some of the feedback we received, but more importantly, the documents in those planning documents that were done years ago fully supported the proposals that we have here today. So what we've tried to do is orient our buildings to match that same type of orientation before. We've included the dog parks and the parks that were encouraged before. We've included the trail connections and the pedestrian activity and the streetscape environment. Those were all cues that we took directly from those planning documents and incorporated directly in our project. So I'm grateful that when back in 2010, when the city adopted this Peoria Sports Complex urban design, they wanted to create this urban feeling. They wanted to create a successful, walkable, pedestrian-oriented, focused type of development. And while it's mixed use in nature for the larger area, it also has individual components, like the hotel piece coming in across the street and like the higher density residential that we're proposing today. What I want to make clear, though, is while we're proposing 22 units per acre, that's still much less than what was originally hopefully encouraged in this area. I think heights at one point, part of this plan, were encouraged to be from 2 to 10 stories. And so I think we're far more appropriate in scale to the context that surrounds us than what was originally encouraged by this plan. Lori has done a fantastic job, so I don't know how much I want to be redundant, so I might skip past a couple of my slides and exhibits, but let me walk you through our presentation briefly. In fact, I'll probably just jump right into this exhibit here. This plan is between 75th Avenue to 83rd Avenue. It's much bigger than this 16 acres here. It's intended to be a much more expansive area. We're the east end and there was a west end, but it's the overall goal to create vibrancy, to transform this area, and to have these individual pieces all sort of connect into a larger mixed-use area with pedestrian connectivity where someone can take a bicycle from the east side and go through these pathways and end up at the sports complex. What I liked about this plan is how it establishes a very unique identity for the area. It talks about pedestrian connections and what we can accomplish with those skunk creeks, which I think in prior times have been sort of ignored. We want to activate. So here's the proposal. And what I certainly like about this is not your typical garden style apartment. As you can see from our design, we want to create more of an urban feel with more premium finishes, higher quality architecture that hopefully can acquire premium type of renter profile. Rarely do you see a development like this that opens itself up to the street. On almost every circumstance, an apartment community walls itself off. It encloses itself. We're one of those few that actually have our buildings fronting onto the street. And one of those few where they actually provide a streetscape where there's seating and benching for people to actually enjoy and walk. This is a very unique part of this project, but it's one that we've taken those design cues from that design guideline and those plans. It not only implements at East End, but I think it makes it a better project for this community and what we're proposing to do. What I like about this is it's highly stylized and it sets it apart from any other development of this nature in the city of Peoria. And Opus is a tremendous developer, but one thing they do is never design any project 2 times. Every project is designed uniquely for its area and context. Back to this, I like how they incorporate that East End terminus with that boulevard promenade feeling. So you see a very significant sense of arrival coming into the community. It's a mix of 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units. So the 3 stories are about 35 feet or so. The 4-story units are about 48 feet. But it has enhanced perimeter landscaping. And within the development itself, all those pedestrian linkages connect through a series of pathways and connection points. So if you're on the east side to the west, from the north to the south, you can follow a series of very purposely designed pedestrian linkages within the development. Now, there are significant amount of open space within it, but I love the amenities, the dog parks, the resort type of pool, the fitness center, the outdoor game areas, the courtyard areas, even some of the barbecue remadas and kitchens and things like that. For comparison purposes, this aligns perfectly with what the current entitlements allow today. A 48-foot tall building is allowed today, and we're proposing at its max a 48-foot tall building. The difference is our setbacks as compared to the current zoning are far greater than what you could do by right, and our lot coverage is far less than what you could do by right today. I want to highlight a couple of things here, though, is the building height and placement. What you see is we anticipated the community to the east, and so rather than putting our buildings along the edge, we try to centralize those taller buildings in the middle. We try to put triple the amount of setback that you'd expect to see. But one of the comments that we got from the community was the windows on those units and facing to the community, what would they see? And so we purposely have decided to reorient our windows inside the buildings. So rather than having a lot of east-west looking units, we've reoriented. I'll go into that on the next exhibit right here. I already mentioned, though, that from the inception, we've tried to design this site purposefully with those enlarged setbacks. And these are the buildings, I think, with the tallest ones being in the center. This exhibit is the before and the after. See, before we had those buildings at the top, with those views looking directly east. 4 stories, so you'd have 3 windows on each floor. There'd be 12 windows, so to speak. What we've done now is reoriented those buildings, the unit orientation on the inside. So your buildings are either looking north and south, and only 1 window per floor looking east. And if you think about it, the first and second floor are unlikely to be looking over to the eastern direction because of the trees and the way the site view corridors work. So you're really only talking about, I think, the 3rd and the 4th floor. I love how, I mentioned this already, but I love how this development activates the street. I don't know how many people will be walking in Arizona, but I know in the springtime, going to the Peoria Sports Complex and the spring training games, this will be an area of refuge with shade and seating. And if you're on the bike path, if you're on a walking tour, you can actually enjoy those amenities spaces there. But we've pushed our buildings closer to the street. And by so doing, it gives us a more of a livelier environment. And by pushing them closer to the street, it pushes them further away from the residents to the east. I'll probably just skip these quick because I think Lori covered these very well, as well as those trail connections. But you've handled the questions regarding traffic. We simply wanted to observe those plans that have long been in place with the city of Peoria. The general plan, the circulation plan, the urban design plan, none of those suggest any connection to Grandview Road. The traffic impact is appropriate for this area. It's no greater than what you would expect to see. In fact, I would probably submit to you that it's less intense than what that plan originally envisioned if you were to have 10 stories of development with commercial and retail all involved. We will have an access point on the east side for students here, so if they wanted to go to the bus stop in front of Grandview, they could be able to do that without having to make the Peoria School District create a separate bus stop along 75th Avenue. We've intended to maximize our open space, where we have 26% of that open space, and a lot of that's planted towards the streetscape as well. Very large trees, and in fact, we took a lot of significant input from the folks at the neighbor meeting to be able to put a certain type of tree along that eastern side. And in fact, I think I heard a comment to provide hostile vegetation, which isn't a phrase you hear very often, but I think means thorny or spiny. And so we're trying to incorporate a lot of those elements along the eastern side. But here's some of the feedback we received. And Lori mentioned that she received a petition signed at the neighbor meeting by, I think, 30 individuals. What was a little disheartening about that was those petitions were signed before anybody had heard about our proposal from us directly, and they're presented to us at that meeting. And I think many people who had come to that meeting had realized that perhaps their perception before and the reality afterwards didn't align. And I think that's probably best represented by the lack of the 30 people that are here today. There are still some concern. I think there's probably an individual here that will speak. But once people start to understand what we're proposing and what you could do by right on the property and what we were proposing, I think that seemed to address a lot of concerns. The primary concern I heard was a fear that traffic would be connecting through to Bell Road to 75th Avenue, and there'd be a lot of circulation in front of that neighborhood. I won't say that was the overall consensus, but I did hear that quite often. And I think showing that we had that terminus seemed to address many concerns. There was a lot of concern about privacy and windows and how that looked, and that's why we were responsive and changed some of that orientation inside of our buildings. One thing I do want to point out, though, is we didn't put the broad side of our buildings facing the community. We flipped them to the narrow side, which does improve that view corridor and that shed. Lighting is at a 0-foot candle at the property line, which addressed some concerns. We also heard from the neighbors that they enjoy walking across the property, and while it's a private property, that might be considered trespass. We did put a public trail along our north side. And in our original proposal, it was fenced off and it was to be used for our residents only. On our second resubmittal, we removed that fencing and opened that trail up so it can connect all the way from the community to the east, through our project, and onto 75th Avenue and beyond. And that is a significant benefit, because when you have a P83 sports complex and you're creating a mixed-use environment, and you want an urban feel and you want a pedestrian environment, having the ability to ride your beach cruiser or your kids on the little stroller or do a jogging trail, that connection now is provided, whereas it wasn't before. I guess I'll summarize with some of these points right here. I think there are many benefits of this proposal. First of all, when the city lays out a plan 8 years ago, it's rare that you find someone that comes in so quickly. I think 8 years is a short time. Planning usually plans 20 and 30, 40 years out. We're grateful that we can actually bring in a development that complies with that sports complex mixed-use concept as part of the broader area. It advances those cities' goals, both in the general plan and in the urban design plan. It is not only consistent, but it actually revitalizes a property that's been vacant for some time, forever actually, and it got its entitlements back in the 1970s or the 1980s, if I can recall correctly. So the fact that it's sat vacant this long and finally someone's willing to develop it, it's a true testament to the developer. As you saw in some prior exhibits, we have really, really weird geometry on our property. It's hard to find a property that's as oddly shaped as ours, and they've done a good use making meaningful development on that property. And siting buildings so that they correspond well on the site, correspond well with the street, and don't have the broad side facing the neighbors, but the narrow sides. Given that the homes next to us are all two-story homes, our closest building next to them is a garage at 13 feet tall. Our next closest building is a three-story structure at 97 plus feet. So I think it's been well planned and thought out in the way it's been designed. Now, I imagine that an industrial building, if it were to be built here, who knows what type or which way, but industrial buildings tend to have bigger massing. They tend to have their loading areas in the back. They tend to have some of those noise that comes at air brakes and sometimes outdoor storage. And so I don't pretend to know what that would look like, but my hunch tells me that this project is probably more thoughtfully and better designed than what you could do under the current entitlements, which is why I believe this has less of an impact on that existing residential area than what you could otherwise do. It is supported by staff. It's been supported by your business owners in that area. And I guess I'll end that now. Love the chance for a few moments on the back end after the neighbor speaks, so I can maybe clarify any comments he has and probably describe our neighborhood outreach effort on that end as well. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Any commissioners have any questions or comments of the applicant? I have a question.
Thought I'd get.
Do you have an elevation showing what the neighbors will see that are in that neighborhood looking at your development on the west side?
I do not. And the reason why that was prepared was because there was a request from staff about what would the appearance be along 75th Avenue. And so that's why we went forward and prepared that, but we do not have one for the east side.
Okay, thank you. Excuse me, Mr. Rose, have you any additional speaker request forms than the one I currently have? I'm sorry, Ms. Connie, did you want to speak?
Yeah, I had a question. What about the traffic on Bell Road? I realize, you looked at Paradise Lane and 75th Avenue, but when it comes to February, late January, February, and March, it's like a parking lot for the rest of us. I mean, it is terrible. And now you have, and has anybody done a traffic study of what's going to happen to Bell?
I might defer that question better to the city's traffic engineer.
Vice Chair Nelson and Commissioners. This study did look at Bell and 75th Avenue. That's as far as the study, as far as requirements need to look at. And it has little impact to that intersection. Now, I'm not saying that the intersection runs as smoothly as possible. 75th and Bell is a City of Glendale intersection, but what I want to make you guys a preview of is the new adaptive project that we just implemented on Bell Road. It's a multi-jurisdictional project that expands the county, Surprise, ADOT, and Glendale, and us. It goes from 99th Avenue to 71st or something like that. And what an adaptive program is, and we just implemented it about 3 or 4 months ago, it's real-time measurements. So the video detection is taking real-time measurements of upstream and downstream traffic and it's communicating to all the other traffic signals saying, hey, I have a platoon of traffic coming, we got to give it a green. We've actually done before and after tests on it, and we reduced travel times almost in half in some of the congested time frames. But it's still a pilot program, and we're testing it. It's technology and advancements in traffic that's going to address some of the concerns on Bell Road. This particular project won't have much impact to an intersection like Bell Road. It's built wide. It already has a ton of traffic. If you recall, the peak hours on this particular project, it was in the low hundreds, which from a traffic engineering perspective, in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't have much impact. But we're doing other things to try to address Bell Road, and we're working with Glendale, we're working with the county, we're working with ADOT, and then, of course, in the city of Peoria. You're welcome.
So I got a little out of order here. I need to open the public hearing now because we do have a public speaker on this. I'd like to call up Derek Pierce. Welcome. If you could please state your name and address for the record.
I'm Derek Pierce. I live at 16310 North 73rd Lane.
Thank you.
My main concern with the development is the four-story buildings. The Peoria Sports Complex Urban Design Plan states several times within it, building height should be compatible with surrounding single-family residential development to the east in the city of Glendale, which would be our community, or transition in height from 75th Avenue to the single family. This plan does not do that. You have a petition from us that states that the building heights are not compatible, which there was a copy of that site plan along with it, so people did know what was going to be going in there. And they've stated that the four-story buildings can't go up next to 75th Lane or 75th Avenue. And I can understand why they can't go there, but they still, the four-story buildings are not compatible with us. There's no reason why they can't be reduced to a three-story. I have no problem with the three-story buildings. They have adequate setbacks. The landscaping they're providing will provide pretty adequate site view, blockage and stuff. I'm fine with the three-story. The people in the north of our neighborhood are going to be looking at the back of a 48-foot building. I don't care if it's 102 feet away. That's still going to dominate the view from your backyard. If that was your house, would you guys be okay with that and feel that it's compatible with your neighborhood? I've also done some looking through City of Peoria, trying to find other locations where there are four-story apartments this close to residential, and couldn't find anything. So I don't know why it's not okay everywhere but next to us. That's all I have to say. Thanks.
Okay, appreciate it. Thank you. As we have no other requests to speak, I'm going to close the public hearing. Does the applicant wish to respond to anything that was just brought up? I'm fine. You don't? Okay. Do we have any further comments from commissioners before we take action on Z 108-01?
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Condi?
I have a concern like you do on what is going to be seen by the residents along, the back of that. And I wish I had some sort of, I drove it and I looked at it. I didn't drive the neighborhoods to see if there was another four-story apartment building. I probably should have, but I didn't. And I can see the concern for those houses that are just south of Grandview and are going to be looking smack into it. I would really like to see some drawing. I'm just going to make that mention.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other comments before we take a motion? All right. Do I have a motion?
Mr. Vice Chairman, I motion that we approve case Z1801 City Council, subject to conditions in the staff report.
Thank you, Commissioner Alsop. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Patterson. Please vote. passes 4-1. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time.
The next agenda item is call to the public. Are there any comments from the public on non-agenda items? Hearing none. Move to our next agenda item, updates from staff. Does staff have anything to report tonight?
Vice Chair, members of the commission, no report this evening other to note the next meeting date of June 7th, 2018. In reference to the meeting later that month, we're not sure yet whether we'll be meeting on June 21st.
All right. Next is reports and updates from the Planning and Zoning Commission. Does anybody have anything to report or update? Seeing none, I'm going to call this meeting adjourned.